So for our first session this afternoon, we have a keynote panel. And I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming Chine McDonald, Dr. Jasjit Singh, Dr. Iona Hine, and Dr. Anastasia Badder. What I'm going to do is just give a very brief introduction of all of them first, so that we can then seamlessly move from one to the other through the presentation. But if any of them want to then add anything about yourself, then obviously you're welcome to do that. So I'll just welcome Chine first of all. So Chine McDonald is a writer, broadcaster and director of Theos, which is a think tank for religion and society. She was previously head of public engagement at Christian Aid. She's authored God is Not a White Man and Other Revelations in 2021, which was runner-up for the Michael Ramsey Prize for Theological Writing. She's also vice chair of Greenbelt Festival and a trustee of Christian Aid, and she studied theology and religious studies at Cambridge University. Chine will be followed by Dr. Jasjit Singh, who's an academic at the University of Leeds, specialising in transmission of religion and culture among Sikhs in Diaspora. His research focuses on traditional forms of transmission through families and in schools, and newer forms through digital technology. He is currently working on a project exploring engagement between the Sikh community and the RE sector in Britain. And then we're going to be joined by Dr. Iona Hine and Dr. Anastasia Badder, who both work with the Cambridge Interfaith Programme, catalysing interreligious understanding and forging cross-sector partnerships with colleagues at the University of Cambridge. Iona previously was trained as an RE teacher, hurrah, managed mail order books and digitised Cassia's work when she was in Sheffield. Her PhD focused on 16th century Bible translations. Whereas Anastasia, her work spans anthropology and educational sciences from various countries, and she's currently researching object-orientated learning and its efficacy for RE teaching in UK schools. So the theme of this keynote panel is researching worldview communities. Kind of, why does that matter? How can we get involved with that in our different ways and from our different contexts? So in a moment, Chine is going to share first, and then we will move straight on to Jasjit, followed by Iona and Anastasia. After that part of the presentation, I'm going to give each of them an opportunity to ask each other a question first, and then we will, if they want to, and then we will move to questions in the chat, okay? And I shall facilitate that. So without further ado, Chine, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be part of this and to be among people who hopefully think that this conversation is important. I'm going to remind you of why it is that religious education matters. As Catherine mentioned, I'm Director of Theos, which is a religion and society think tank. And we exist to tell a better story about Christianity and religion in public life. We think that religious ideas that have been honed over many centuries can offer a helpful contribution to tackling and understanding some of the biggest issues of our day. And we do that across 5 different areas: understanding faith, faith in communities, science, technology and climate change, work, economy and poverty, and health, well-being and life stages. I'm going to set my timer so I don't kind of go over time. But let me take you back to when Theos started about 20 years ago, to the early 2000s. What was in the air at that time in public life? Well, we had Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair not doing God. We were living in the years post 9/11, an event that we can truly say changed the world, and religion was at the heart of it. All the while, people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Dan Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of new atheism, were saying that religion should be sidelined, should be kind of banished to the private sphere, should be relegated to a superstitious and dangerous bin of the past. Now, at this time, I was studying theology and religious studies at university. And what was in the air within that academic context was explorations of the sociology of religion, the secularization thesis, that suggested that religion would soon be on its way out. What I want to spend the time talking about is that recent headlines suggest that maybe they're right. I'll start with that and then move on to suggesting that they're wrong. So you may have seen in the headlines a few weeks ago that religion might be on the way out. So we had all of these types of headlines a few weeks ago. We had the census a couple of years ago that said that most people, an increasing number of people, were non-religious. That less than half the population of England and Wales were religious. And then a new piece of research, landmark research, as part of the Exploring Atheism project, suggested that we are now living in an atheist age. And I was really honoured to be part of the kind of launch of that and to be invited into discussions, even though I can lead a religion think tank, about the rise of religion. And what the research showed was that there are more people who either don't or aren't sure whether they believe in God in the UK than there are theists. But what was interesting in that is that non-religion doesn't mean atheism. That's what we saw in the census figures. There are all sorts of interesting beliefs going on underneath the surface. It's interesting kind of whether we want to count kind of a head count as defining an age, but it was a really helpful, I think, research that suggested and kind of reframed potentially where we have been over the past 50 years. Absolutely a rise in non-religion, a decline in religious affiliation, a decline in Christianity. It is no longer kind of socially advantageous to be Christian in the UK. We don't have that sense of a cultural norm of Christianity. We don't have that sense, or do we, that people were Christian because they were British. Although a head count might not be helpful, I think what is helpful are the kind of looking at the cultural markers of religion in public life. I want to move on to suggest that even if you look at the headlines of the past few weeks, religion is absolutely still part of the conversation. The new atheist 20 years ago may have said that religion was on its way out, that it was irrelevant, that it had nothing to do with how society should function, but it isn't going away. And in fact, in many parts of the world, religion is growing. I think to ignore it means to be ignorant about the values, beliefs, cultures, motivations underpinning individuals' lives today. So I'm going to just rattle through a few issues that are in the news right now, which we just can't think about without understanding or paying attention to religion. So first of all, the riots that took place over the summer. You might think that actually that's about the kind of the rise of the far right, anti-immigration, but actually underneath the surface are issues of identity, of religious belief, of the intertwining of Christianity with nationalism, of Christianity and whiteness, and also an undercurrent of Islamophobia, thinking about kind of immigration. On Tuesday night, I was at an advanced screening of a new documentary that's going to be shown on Monday on Channel 4, which is called Exposing the Far Right. And it was this undercover investigation done by Hope Not Hate into infiltrating the far right. Now, as I was watching that documentary with the abhorrent racism that was included, as well as the misogyny, what I saw was lots of Christian symbolism, religious symbolism on members of the far right's phones, on banners that they were kind of holding, of pictures of the Pope, of this intertwining of of nationalism with Christianity. So what is going on there? It takes people who understand and who notice those kinds of symbols to help us understand and unpack these issues. So religion matters in the riots, and in racism and the rise of the far right. Religion also matters in the assisted dying debate. To what extent is this a religious debate? On one side, you have the National Secular Society and Humanists putting forward the false view, I think, that you can only be against assisted dying if you are religious, and that religious people are attempting to make people do what they don't want to do. So this is the front cover of the Church Times today, kind of holding those two things in tension. Even if it were the case that it's only religious views that are anti-assisted dying, I think that religious ideas about what a human is and what life is for, questions of interdependence, mutuality, the nature of suffering, community, bodies, can be useful lenses through which to explore this moral question. And even if opposition to assisted dying was entirely religious, it still doesn't mean that it should be dismissed out of hand, because religious people do make up a large part of our society still. Religion also matters in questions of immigration and social cohesion. Wrapped up in debates about nationalism are questions about social cohesion and immigration. Our research ahead of the election at Theos explored different religious approaches to key election issues. It found that asylum seekers are overall the migrant group that the British are least likely to want to enter the country, even among Muslims, who are the group most supportive of accepting asylum seekers overall. We found different and surprising views among Christian groups. There is also within this conversation a tendency to assume that more immigrants to the UK means more people from non-Christian faiths. And so it's wrapped up in this anti-immigrant rhetoric, which is wrapped up in Islamophobia. But research by Pew a few weeks ago found that 58% of all the refugees who come to the UK are actually Christian, and only 17% are Muslim. So what's going on under the surface of these figures and this rhetoric in public life? And just quickly to mention two more things. Religion matters in the US election coming up in a few weeks. This intertwining of religion, politics, culture. What does the term evangelical Christian mean? Is it a religious label or is it a political one? And then, of course, religion matters in the Middle East, which is often seen as a religious conflict, but there are a number of myths that surround this, which is the biggest issue of our day. And closer to home, as we see kind of protests taking place, we see a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in Islamophobia. Apart from the conflict itself, how does the Middle East affect interfaith relations in the UK today? And how does all of this feed into social cohesion? So this is just a reminder to you that next time anyone tries to suggest that religion or religious studies are irrelevant, tell them simply that they are wrong.
Thank you ever so much, Chine, for that whistle-stop tour of why religious education matters in schools and why, therefore, researching into it is even more important. We're going to move straight on to Jasjit to share his thoughts.
Thanks, Catherine. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, great. Yeah. Thanks, Chine. That was really helpful. Particularly the last line there, much appreciated. Yeah, so I'm an accidental academic, and like many of you, I'm just interested too, which is how I got into this. So I just thought I'd indulge myself a little bit, if that's all right, and just talk about my career today in terms of researching the Sikh community and worldview communities, and within that, just raise some of the issues that I've had to consider as I've gone through this. So, yeah, like a good Sikh boy, I used to work in IT, and then I came into academia quite late, actually, because I was interested. And I firstly was looking at why I was seeing. Oh yeah, no slides, by the way. I'm just gonna kind of see my face for 10 minutes. So sorry about that. I was just interested in understanding why young Sikhs were engaging with their faith and their tradition outside traditional institutions, or why I saw so much activity taking place outside traditional institutions. I thought I'd start a master's to research this, and I thought this would be straightforward because obviously I'm a Sikh, so Sikhs will want to talk to me, and I'll understand pretty much everything and everywhere they're coming from. So but the first issue that you face as a researcher is your own status as a researcher. Where do you sit as an individual in terms of your insider outsider status? And although that's often a frame that's used, things aren't really that simple. So you know, people might assume that I'm an insider to the Sikh community, but as soon as you start scratching the surface, you see there are various layers of insider and outsider. So, for example, while conversations could take place primarily in English, and I could, you know, throw a bit of Punjabi in there too because I've got the background. In terms of my particular situation, that's obviously not the same as every other Sikh I would encounter. So it's interesting when you come in as a supposed insider, there are still layers to think about. And this is why it's so important to think about your own positionality and reflexivity before you start researching another community, your own or any community really, in terms of your own perspective on this, your relationship with the people that you're actually researching. And I suppose also, why are you undertaking this particular piece of research in the first place? Because we're all busy, we all have lives. People don't tend to just do things for the sake of it. So there's usually some kind of, if not agenda, which is probably too strong a term, some kind of reason why you've kind of got into this particular situation where you'd like to research a worldviews community. So positionality is about your own background, your own cultural heritage. So, for example, my turban style gives away a lot about my family background. Maybe not to many people on the call, but to another Sikh, they would kind of know pretty much, you know, that my parents are from East Africa, via India, via East Africa, just to kind of give that away. But yeah, so there are clues within communities which members of those communities themselves may not understand and be aware of. And it's also important, as I was researching, as I began to research young Sikhs, and as I kind of came in and as an academic researcher, as I said, accidental academic, it's often not clear what the power dynamics in any kind of research actually are. So you might come in and think that you know, I've not changed. I'm the same person I always was. But the fact that you've come in as a researcher means that there's already an academic, already a power dynamic at play there, because you're in a position where you're asking this person for their perspective. But then you decide which aspects of that perspective you then record or publish at a later date. So there's a power dynamic there as well. So those were probably the two main things that came across to me when I started, was this insider outsider, the importance of personal positionality and understanding that and being aware of that as you go into a conversation, and understanding the power dynamics too. And part of that then is all about gaining access and building trust. So of course I could walk into any gurdwara because they're open to anybody, but when I was trying to ask permission to attend particular events or events organized by young people, that there was obviously a different dynamic there, where communities which maybe have been researched to a particular extent might be suspicious as to what people's motivations are. So it's a case of building trust and understanding how you're going to do that in the first place, which also brings in ethical considerations too, because obviously you could quite easily enter a community, squeeze as much data as you can out of them, and then, you know, publish and be on your way. But what does that do in terms of completing the loop? So from that point onwards, from that first point of engagement where I was being asked these questions, basically the question was, you know, what's the point of this beyond you getting an academic qualification, which is a really good question to ask. It makes you think, actually, yes, you know, the fact that these people are giving me their time means that I need to make sure that I'm giving something back too. So in terms of gaining access and building trust, this is all about transparency. It's all about, and it's difficult. It's interesting. I've kind of reflected on this. You know, if I'm attending a gurdwara or a Sikh wedding as a normal human being, but I see something interesting, and I record it mentally. Am I undertaking research? Am I undertaking research all the time? Do I have to explicitly state that? And then so you kind of think about what's the situation where you would have to or wouldn't have to. So the conclusion I've kind of come to is that if I'm for example researching a particular event, it is up to me to say, look, and I'm going to record what's going on. Then it is up to me to say explicitly to the people involved, by the way, you know, I'm here as a researcher, as opposed to me being at a particular event or you know, function as an individual. By the way, do stop me, because I do a whole module on this, so I could probably spend the whole weekend talking about this. So please tell me to shut up whenever I've run out of time.
No, you've got a couple more minutes, Jasjit.
All right. No worries, thank you. Okay, so the other thing, again, sensitivity to people's beliefs I think is really, really important, because obviously all of us as individuals, and quoting the video, we all have our own positionalities. It's important to kind of understand why you're there. You're there to be inquisitive, not judgmental, to quote Ted Lasso, if anyone watches that. But be inquisitive, not judgmental. You're not there to assess the validity of people's beliefs and opinions. You're there to understand why they have them. So avoid making assumptions. Understand that certain practices may have deep significance, and again, behave accordingly. Which again helps build trust if you recognize that in the first instance when you're thinking about the ethical considerations. Also, protecting the anonymity of individuals, again, in terms of the ethics is really, really important, and especially if discussing sensitivities around particular belief systems. So I suppose what I'm saying is that it isn't just a case of turning up, even if you do think you are an insider. There's a lot of work you have to do yourself as an individual to assess your own place, and also to ensure that when you are researching worldview communities, you have the people you're researching's interests at heart, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are giving you the time. It doesn't do anybody any favors if you misrepresent people. So if you're so what I've started doing is if I do interview people, and say, for example, quotes may be contentious or unclear, you make sure that anything that you quote has been cleared by the person that you're talking to. So it's just all about making sure that you're looking after the people that you're actually engaging. Because if that doesn't happen, then obviously once that relationship of trust breaks down, it's very unlikely that you're going to be let in again. So and it also paints all researchers in a really bad light as well. So I can't understate the significance of looking after the people you're researching in a whole variety of ways. In terms of, on a more practical basis, in terms of methodologies, obviously there are pros and cons for qualitative and quantitative methods. But again, the point about ethics and about protecting respondents continues. It is as important. And finally, I think I'll probably finish here just to kind of re-emphasize the point about power dynamics. Again, it's something that it's quite easy to not be aware of if you're the person with the power, right? And that's the case everywhere, isn't it? If you're the person with the power, it's quite easy to not be aware of the fact that you have this particular kind of status. So ensure that you do as much as you can when entering a particular dynamic to, I mean, you can never level it out, but at least expressing the fact that you're aware of the distinction here, I think that does go a long way to trying to kind of equalize the conversation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks ever so much, Jasjit. There's so much there that I think we can take away for how our classroom contexts work, as well as kind of research, kind of within particular worldview communities specifically as well. And the whole question around power dynamics, we're really interested to see if we come back to that a bit later when we're chatting. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Iona and Anastasia. They're going to sort of do a joint presentation, as they're both from the Cambridge Interfaith Programme. So over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As you've heard already, I am Dr. Iona Hine, and I work as Programme Manager for the Cambridge Interfaith Programme, based in the Faculty of Divinity at the University of Cambridge. Under the leadership of Professor Esra Özürek, just effort to change my slide, good. CIP works to advance research in the field of religion, and especially interreligious inquiry. As Programme Manager, I have a strong remit for external engagement and cross-sector knowledge exchange, including with the RE community, because right from the beginning of CIP's work, we envisioned it in terms of partnership and collaboration. Some of that partnership and collaboration is within the university. Our research forum includes not only the kinds of obviously religious learning you might encounter in the Cambridge in Your Classroom resources, but also an ongoing dialogue with architecture, business, engineering, linguistics, politics, and so on. But in the next 12 minutes or so, Dr. Bader and I will demonstrate the outcomes of an external partnership that began not in the domains of education or combating discrimination, both of which are strategic focuses for CIP, but from our interest in ecology. front and centre of CIP's vision is the Religion and Global Challenges Initiative. To cite statistics, as of 2010, the Pew Research Centre estimated 84% of the world's population had some religious affiliation, while their 2022 projections envisage that by 2060, that will rise to 87% of the world's population. Given this international significance, religion deserves to be taken seriously as we seek ways forward in the face of global challenges like conflict, migration, health and well-being, and climate change. At the back end of 2022, I was approached by the local water supplier with a proposal for action research on the topic of religion and water use. I show you. It seemed to CIP colleagues that our expertise in ethnographic research could be a valuable addition to their plans. The collaboration proper has been underwritten by the Ofwat Innovation Fund, enabling work with a dozen stakeholder organisations ranging from faith-based climate action to water industry actors, led by South Staffs Water, which is the parent company providing Cambridge's water supply. At industry level, just go back one. At industry level, the real question was, can water efficiency at a customer level be improved by attending to religious water use? And to explain, because that might seem counterintuitive, water companies receive a bonus for reducing the average household usage among their customer base. I shall hand over now to Anastasia.
So what did we do? Well, we framed our input, as Iona said, as ethnography. So seeking to explore how local religious communities use and value water. An ethnographic approach involves spending time with and talking to people, taking seriously their experiences and perspectives, and taking them as legitimate knowledge producers that you, the researcher, are there to learn from. We had 4 months to complete our inquiry, and as you can see here, was pretty ambitious from the start. I'm not expecting you to read all of this in detail, but we can, circulate the slides if you'd like to inspect. But so we only had 4 months, so we ended up narrowing the scope of our inquiry to study Jewish and Muslim communities here in Cambridge. I, as the lead researcher on this portion of the work, conducted interviews and participant observation with self-identified community members and ran workshops for project interlocutors, including colleagues. At these workshops, I often started by inviting people to make the water cycle with pipe cleaners and pegs, and to encounter water use in a range of religious texts, drawing on the practice of scriptural reasoning. And I've been continuing to invite people to engage with water in different ways, for example, through water walks, water play, but that's kind of a spin-off project that actually has grown out of this. So alongside this work, we met regularly with Cambridge water representatives and people from other water companies and sustainability initiatives involved in the Umbrella project. And I also took them as interlocutors in the research. They're also water users, right? Also participants in this conversation around water, values, sustainability, and religious life, even though they probably weren't thinking of themselves as interlocutors to this project. So what did we learn? Quite a lot, actually, even though we only had a couple of months. So I'll highlight a few key points. When asked about religion and water, almost everyone I spoke to was quick to note the role of water in ritual practices and how crucial water was for a lot of ethical practices. People pointed to religious water mandates and reflected on how their actions aligned with those obligations or didn't. Most were aware of the ways water appears in religious texts. You can see here a quote from one interlocutor. Jewish interlocutors in particular described links between water and festivals. Some described multiple waters or things that different waters can do. Some water can purify, and some water can only clean in the hygienic sense, for example. And some felt that having certain kinds of waters in Cambridge made Cambridge itself as a place holier. Some pointed to the environment as inspiring for humans, a reminder of divine presence, relationship to the divine, the power of the divine, including as God's creation. And at an institutional level, community leaders and organizers aim to incorporate sustainable practices and materials into their community actions and spaces. People offered a wide variety of interpretations and relations that went beyond water as a commodity or resource, whose sole purpose is human exploitation. So some people talked about water rights. Some people spoke about grieving for polluted or vanishing waters. And some even talked about water as an actor in itself. When it came to this research and the water companies who instigated it, almost everybody I spoke to was very skeptical. And I think we could say distrustful or at least uncertain about the companies and their motives. So they felt the water company had made lots of mistakes, very public mistakes, right? Leaky pipes, dumping sewage into the sea. And so a lot of interlocutors that I spoke to felt, why is the water company coming after me and my practices, or trying to point at the finger at me as a inefficient water user, and maybe rather the water company could learn from me. A lot of interlocutors reported knowing that there are water supply concerns in Cambridge and in the UK in general, and also an awareness of overall climate issues. And a lot of people reported engaging in some form of water, climate, and related sustainability actions already. So that's what we learned from members of the religious communities we spoke to. But what did we learn from the water industry? In conversations amongst industry actors, religious community members were framed as distant and mythical others in possession of religion or culture in ways that we, in the water boardroom, were not. It was clear that in their personal lives, at least a few of those board members were themselves actually religious. But somehow there wasn't space to acknowledge, discuss, or be inspired by those religious values in the boardroom. Instead, there was a lot of talk about how they, the customers, are not aware, they need to be educated, but they're so hard to reach. Ways of talking about water and religious water users in water decision-making spaces overlooked or even precluded other ways of relating to and valuing water, and failed to notice existing sustainability knowledges, practices, and motivations, including these ways of seeing water beyond commodity or resource. So, based on these learnings, we made 7 recommendations. To water industry actors, we recommended listening and learning from religious or spiritual or cosmological communities and individuals. We suggested that alternative ways of relating to water could offer new pathways for sustainability. And we also recommended that the industry take time to reflect on the assumptions and biases they brought to their encounters with religious communities. We encourage them to avoid generalizing and to attend to the great diversity within communities, including in their approaches to water. So a lot of our recommendations to the water industry were really about kind of listening and learning, and I think which kind of contrasted with their expectation for themselves to be the educators. To all stakeholders interested in the intersection of religion and climate change, we recommended collaboration. I think for meaningful and just change, it's critical that those most immediately impacted by water interests and issues should be at the center of the design process of any solutions. So this means that it's crucial for all actors to acknowledge that anyone can meaningfully participate in that process. And there's already so much going on in this space that the water industry doesn't see, that collaboration should support or at least recognize existing sustainability practices and relations. And for those with expertise in the domain of religion and education, we recommended further research and engagement, potentially including the development of religious sensitivity training.
And in that last item, you'll hear a CIP term. We prefer to draw a distinction between literacy, often conflated with knowledge acquisition, and sensitivity as an attitudinal disposition and goal.
So why does this matter? This was quite a small research project, but I think it has major implications for water futures and for climate action. I think probably many of us in Cambridge and around the UK and really across the world know that our water courses are in crisis. And more broadly, climate change is an immediate and pressing issue. The usual approaches to being with water aren't achieving the necessary change. A key part of that issue is that we, and certainly the water industry, And government and planners and developers tend to take water as a commodity and as a resource there for human extraction. Arguments based on crisis and economics, though, are not convincing people to change. And indeed, scientists and water activists and lawmakers and academics more and more agree that the solution to climate change is not going to come from new technologies and improved science communication, but that fundamental changes in attitudes, orientations, and ways of working with water are needed. And we suggest that religiously rooted ways of thinking about and being with water have lessons to offer us here, have motivations beyond economic or efficiency logics, different visions of the future, different ideas about our responsibilities to the earth, to water, and for future generations. And I think equally, this is important because religious lives and needs are often left out of the conversation about climate change solutions. And I would argue that a truly just movement forward has to acknowledge those and has to make space for them in spaces where decisions are made. And I think could even stand to learn from those orientations for improved climate futures.
So the ethnographic research concluded last December. We then ran a cross-sector conference to share learning and highlight international research about water and religion, and we published some key lessons from that. We heard some positive noises from industry stakeholders. They are listening, even as they may not yet have worked out how best to accommodate the learning. Our work in this space is ongoing. As soon as next week, we're collaborating with a community interest company to invite more people to experience being with water otherwise, hosted by Cambridge United Football Club. If you're interested, head to the water pages on our website for further information about this research and our ongoing work. The QR code's the quickest way to get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, what three completely different takes on the title of Researching Worldview Communities. First of all, Chine kind of talking about why research in religion matters, kind of full stop, in terms of what's going on in the world right now and how religion intersects with that in particular. And then Jasjit talking about how we might research religious communities in particular, using Sikh as an example, and really struck Jasjit by the focus you put on positionality and on those power dynamics. I think that's really interesting. And then lastly, a fascinating example from Iona and Anastasia about kind of researching kind of religious perspectives on water. What I loved about what you said, I hadn't realised this before, was that in a sense the whole thing was turned around from the water companies think that they were going to kind of teach something to kind of religious communities, but actually they were the ones that ended up doing the learning. So it's kind of all turned around at the end, which was really fascinating. So I don't know, Chine, do you have a question for any of the other panel members to start us off?
Yes, I can. Let me start with Jasjit. Thank you so much for that. It was a really interesting perspective. I guess I'm interested in that kind of insider-outsider element that you're talking about. And I guess my question is, are you only able to be an insider in researching Sikh communities because you're Sikh? Like, would it be possible for me to research Sikh communities? I think I was thinking about this Channel 4 documentary that I went to, where someone from Hope Not Hate, a journalist, went undercover, infiltrated the far right. Now, he is a white man and he was accompanied by someone who was a white man. There's no way that I would be able to infiltrate that kind of environment. So I'm just fascinated in that kind of the embodiedness and the kind of the fact that some people's bodies are excluded from being able to gain trust within certain communities.
Thanks very much, Chine. Yeah, I know. I'm sure some of us think we're more detectives than researchers, and kind of would like to be in an environment where we would go undercover. But the ethical point of it, So firstly, to answer your first question, no, there'd be no reason why you couldn't research Sikh communities, because much of the early research on Sikh migrants to the UK, for instance, in the 60s and 70s, was all done by non-Sikhs, and it pretty much has been done until probably the mid-90s, or the first, kind of Sikh researchers researching Sikhs, really. So there was a good 30 years of non-Sikhs researching Sikhs. So of course that can be done, and that would be a different dynamic again, wouldn't it? So, but there'd be no reason why you couldn't do it. In terms of the physical side of things, I suppose, again, I mean, all of us, all of our physicalities lead to assumptions, don't they? But the assumptions are usually on the part of the person doing the assuming. So again, the trick is not to make assumptions based on appearance, but it's so easily done. So
yeah, I guess
I suppose it's back to this. Sorry, it's just back to the clarity in your own positionality before you enter. But yeah, go on. Sorry, you're going to come back.
I know we're running out of time, but I'm so fascinating about bias. I guess I'll just, I guess is it better research if it's someone who, or is it worse research because you're part of the community?
I don't think better or worse is probably not that helpful. I think it's I think the more honest it is, because as part the conversation about yourself and your participants should be part of the research itself, if that makes sense. So it's not better or worse. It just needs to be honest. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. It reminds me of my own research, actually. I don't want to get onto that particularly, but how I acknowledged where I was coming from and my position in my research. And I think particularly with the religion and worldviews approach in RE classrooms that I'm a real advocate for, there's a real sense that that's really important, that we're coming as interpreters of religion and worldviews from our own position. But yeah, great questions. I think we could continue that for some time. Jasjit, do you want to ask one of the other panel members a question?
Can I ask everyone a question?
You can ask everyone a question, yeah.
Well, I've got, I suppose the bit that there's, there's one. The question I'll ask is how do we get the word out, basically, because lots of useful research is done, but it's often, especially when it regards religion, which is often religion related research, which is often sidelined anyway because of the discourse around religion. So do you have any experiences in terms of external engagement and the impacts of your research?
Could I ask maybe Iona or Anastasia to answer that? We have got a couple of questions from the chat as well, but I want to give them a chance to say something. So one of you two, do you want to respond?
I'm sure Iona can even say more about this than I can, but I think a key way to kind of get the message out is through collaboration and being open to collaboration with people that you might not even have expected to be. So that might involve collaboration with interlocutors from your work, which we're doing now, as you saw. Our upcoming event next week is actually in collaboration with some people that I met in the course of that project, who are themselves very invested in kind of new water relations and taking a spiritual approach to water. And yeah, so I think that's one way. And another thing that has really interestingly emerged out of this work is, collaboration with unexpected people like engineers and climate scientists, who you would think, on the one hand, of course, they should be interested in lots of different approaches to mitigating climate change, but on the other hand, would probably not normally be interested in what's going on in specific religious communities or religious approaches to water. And yeah, so I think sometimes those kinds of direct working with, and not just putting our research out into the world and hoping somebody picks it up, is one way of doing that.
And this particular research has very much been about building relationships too. We could, if we tried to say on day one to our water industry stakeholders, well, you need to do things differently, they would have struggled to be able to take that on board. Whereas, although the research that Anastasia's done finished it nearly a year ago now, we have continued to be involved in the Umbrella project and continued to hold conversations, and we can see change happening that wouldn't have been possible without building those relationships. So I think that's critical, and it's part of our ethos of partnership working and of being open to some of the stranger things that come at us as opportunities to think, how does that fit with what we're about, and with being able to cultivate spaces to have conversations that don't straightforwardly happen without there being that kind of that capacity to cultivate. So it's that boardroom thing that Anastasia brought out, you know, actually let's go around saying, why can't we talk about this stuff in a boardroom? What could we do to help people talk about this stuff in a boardroom? And I think that some of the answers are not so different to what might be the answers if the question was the classroom versus the boardroom, right? I don't think these are completely different environments, even as they obviously do differ.
That's really, yeah, that's really interesting. And if it's okay, I'd just like to segue that into particularly one of the questions, or a couple of the questions that have come through in the chat, which I think would be really useful to hear your views on. You were just talking about relationships, and I think that's really important. And one of the questions, I'm going to take a couple of questions here, which anyone can answer. So do you think that you can ever remove the power dynamic the researcher has? If not, how can you reduce this interaction with your participants? So in my mind, that was connecting back to sort of relationships, but you might have something else to say on that one. And then someone else has asked, as part of a religion worldviews curriculum in which Key Stage 3 students are developing researcher skills under the human and social sciences discipline, what would be the most important things that they should know about being an effective researcher? So there's a question there about power dynamics, and then a question about being an effective researcher. Open to any of you to respond to that. Either of them.
I'll try the power dynamics one while the others think about it. And it was just to say that I don't think you can remove it, but I think you have to be as transparent and open and reflexive as possible. I think that's the only way you can mitigate it. And there are all kinds of power situations that obtain, because there's also, you know, as a researcher, there's the power of the gatekeepers to give you access to wherever you're trying to research. There's the power of the funders. There are all kinds of dynamics one needs to navigate. And the most you can do is to work out what's the scope of options on the table for other people involved, and be as transparent as possible about that.
Yeah, thanks, Iona. Anyone else on that or the other question about being an effective researcher? Anastasia?
Just to add to that, in terms of the power dynamics, I totally agree. I think you can't ever sort of, get rid of them. But I think one approach that can be useful is also to take ethics and awareness of the power dynamics as a kind of ongoing conversation and negotiation with your interlocutors. So I think ethics doesn't stop at kind of doing our formal ethics approval and getting a consent form signed, but it's rather really an ongoing kind of thing that we work out with the people that we're working with. It's really this kind of dialogic process. And so I think it's, well, of course, self-reflexivity is important. It also doesn't stop with just looking back at ourselves, but it really needs to be this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Anastasia. Chine, I think you wanted to come in as well on one of the questions.
Yeah, just briefly to say on that I'm not a researcher myself, but I've got a team of researchers at Theos. But thinking back to when I studied theology and thinking about sociology of religion, anthropology of religion, all of the researchers, the anthropologists were often, when they were looking at kind of religion or religious practice or ritual within tribal communities in African nations or in the global south, it felt like they didn't have the awareness that I think researchers doing the same now would be. They were often white people watching and looking on from the outside into the kind of the communities that they're looking at. So I think people are much more aware. So the awareness is for me one of the main things that has changed and is the issue.
Anyone want to comment on the other one a little bit more about what was it? Most important things that they should know about being an effective researcher, particularly for young people. Someone's put some helpful link in the chat on this one as well. But any final thoughts on that, Jasjit?
So I'd say critical thinking and open-mindedness, methodological rigor. So it isn't just you need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Obviously, cultural awareness that I talked about, ethics we've kind of mentioned, and as Anastasia said, that's an ongoing process all the way. I mean, I kind of find humility kind of helps as well as a value. So, you know, the kind of, we're not these people coming from on high to research you people down there. This is a relationship, as we've kind of talked about all the way through. So yeah, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, Anastasia.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, definitely, I think another important key skill is just to go in prepared to take people seriously. You know, like Jasjit said, as a researcher, you're not there to explain, or worse, to explain away somebody's kind of religious life way, but rather to take them seriously, and to take them also as a legitimate knowledge holder and producer.
That's fantastic. And in fact, those last couple of comments are exactly what this conference is about. It's everyone coming with humility. The whole idea of the knowledge exchange is that we all see ourselves as experts in different ways, and we can exchange and talk about all those different things, whether it is kind of outlined in the panel sessions or through the chat and in the breakout sessions. It's 2 o'clock. Thank you so much, all of. I think we could all say a lot. Well, you could all say a lot more. I've got loads more questions that I wanted to ask, but thank you so much, all of you, for your contributions this afternoon. We're really, really grateful.